Hi, this is Paul. I am back in Sacramento. I flew back into Sacramento late last night and I tried to stay awake on the airplane to try to get back to Sacramento time. It was a lovely flight over the northern part of the world. Travel, 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 light until it hit Seattle, and then I had to fly from Seattle back to Sacramento, and here I am. Feeling pretty okay. I'm going to try and stay up tonight to get back into the swing of things in terms of California time. My wife has her class on a field trip in Yosemite right now, which she sort of dreaded, but no, she's sending me lovely pictures from Yosemite, and if I had been here, I would have loved to have gone to Yosemite, one of my favorite places in the world. But here I am in my office, as I've said to a number of people. Returning to work after a trip like this is like driving your car into a river. This river has been flowing for the 2 weeks that I've been gone. People have moved, gotten themselves in trouble. Little dramas have arisen. All kinds of things need tending to, and you get back and it's all here. And I got to preach Sunday. So it's always crazy busy coming back. So no Friday live stream tomorrow morning. I will have lots and lots and lots of things to do, including the fact that I have a daughter who is moving back to Sacramento and I got to help her move. All this has to happen this week, and next week I have classes, and the week after that I have both a wedding and a funeral. So Grim Gris complained that there hasn't been any new homeroom content for the last 2 weeks. There were a couple of live streams. Somebody at one of the estuary gatherings said, "Yeah, I watched your live stream, and it had like this weird stuff in the middle." And one of the things that probably most of the hardcore TLCers don't recognize is that a much larger number of people watch maybe 5 to 10 of my videos a year. I mean, think about that. So this poor guy, there was like branding and inside language, TLC language, and he's like, that's sort of, I don't know. So yeah, then there's that. But I want to talk about ARC. I've been thinking a lot about ARC. There are videos that are starting to emerge out there about ARC. It is very clear that when you have a conference of this size, there are many, many different takes on it. Some of them are in Substack. Mary Harrington had a little piece on ARC. She didn't say a lot. About it. She talked about the nomos of the airport, which I thought was from a previous thing that she had done. And boy, she sort of really nailed the aesthetic and the environment of the place. And again, I don't know if that environment helps at all, but they've got 4,000 people to hold, and so that's sort of what they're dealing with. It actually quite different from, let's say, the event that we did in Galway, which was in a beautiful old Roman Catholic church, which was super cool. So it's super cool to do an event like that, but not for 4,000 people. One of the interesting things has been following the political commenters talk about ARC. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that YouTube will sometimes tell me what channels you have a lot of overlap with. And I have a lot of I first saw Lotus Eaters and I thought, what kind of channel do I have overlap with these people? But it's Sargon of Akkad, who I saw there. I didn't go up to him and talk to him because I don't know what I'd say. I don't follow any of his stuff. Bethel did have a conversation with him hosted by Justin Brierley. Justin Brierley was making a ton of content when he was there. It's a great place to make content. I talked to Bethel and mentioned that she talked to him and talked about the fact that he's going to church. And it was also very interesting because later he talks about his wife and his kids and how, when he leaves for one of the interesting things that I constantly see about movement conservatives today is that movement conservatives today are still different from their grandparents, because I'm old enough to remember old conservatives. And he talks about the fact that he went on this conference, and so he left with his wife with his kids, and so he felt bad about that. So, even a movement conservative today that wants to talk about, doesn't like the change, he himself changed in terms of how he raises his family and how he and his wife distribute duties and all of those things, as, let's say, compared to his grandfather or his great-grandfather. I think that's a good thing. But again, conservatism is not just not changing, which I think is a little misleading. Anyway, let's hear a few things that he had to say about the ARC conference.
The ARC conference began with Jordan Peterson, of course, because it's his baby, and his speech was fine, but the thing is, he's sort of calculating it on the go to be very precise. And while I actually enjoyed the content of the speech, I just thought it would have been better if he just had a pre-scripted thing that he'd written out in advance.
And there's a lot of talk about Jordan Peterson's performance at this conference in terms of his main stage performance. These were by no means the best speeches he has given. I think I want to have a conversation with Rafe Kelly about the conference. Rafe Kelly had some really good insights into why Jordan's stuff isn't landing. Jordan is, in these speeches, almost constantly going to the Bible for material. Abraham, Job. He does that in his book, We Who Wrestle with God, which I think that book really struggles. And it struggles in some similar ways to not 12 Rules for Life so much, but Maps of Meaning. And, part of what I noticed is that there's a number of things, but one of the things is that Jordan has been doing these long-form speaking tours all over the world where he doesn't have a set speech, but he gets out on stage and he sort of weaves it together. And when you have an hour or more to talk, it's sort of a good space for Jordan because he can have his little rabbit trails and he can weave this in and weave in that in. And those speeches are sort of similar to me, what these videos are for me, where I'm sort of wandering about and trying to put my speech together. But at a place like ARC, where you have all of these set speeches on a very short time frame, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, Sargon of Akkad is exactly right. Jordan should have figured out, this is what I want to do with this speech. It's going to be bang, 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 and it's going to be there. This is what we're here for. This is what we're trying to do. And in the live streams that I did and in upcoming videos, I'm going to talk more about the tensions at ARC and what's clear coming from not just, say, me, but listening to Sargon of Akkad, listening to Aaron McIntyre, these guys who are basically approaching it from the standpoint of movement conservatives, that many, many people are feeling the tensions within the streams that make up the ARC conference.
And I appreciate that part of it is the performance of him sort of like calculating on the fly. But it did make it slightly difficult to follow, whereas if he'd had just a teleprompter with a pre-written thing that he'd been like, no, this is what I'm trying to say, that would make life a lot easier, just as a small sort of tonal thing. But the theme of the conference and the theme of his speech is basically, he starts, what's the defining characteristic of this civilizational moment? Because the point is that they're trying to recapture the story of the West that we can be proud of and that we can stand on in the face of the sort of postmodern deconstructionism. And he's trying to create a kind of propositional ideology of Western civilization. I think I might actually do a separate thing on this at some point, because this is a minefield that he's stepping into. He's identified the right problem, which is an ideology has been trying to destroy Western civilization, and I'm not sure that the correct response is, well, we have a counter ideology for Western civilization instead.
So is this thumbnail where it says what's wrong with hedonism, does that sum up the content of the speech itself, or is that just one of the things that he's addressing as part of this?
That's one of the themes that he's addressing, because of course we do live in a much more hedonistic age than we ever have done before, actually. And he goes on a bit of a tangent in sort of the middle of the speech, going, well, there's a problem with hedonism because there's lack of responsibility and various other things. And that's all.
And those of us who have listened to Jordan work this, and he's been working this for a long time, where he basically connects individual maturation with delaying gratitude, sacrifice. Of course, since the gospel seminar, he's been on this point about sacrifice, 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 and he sees it for the individual, and he sees it for the society, and it sees it as the definition of maturation, and he contrasts it with basically indulgent hedonism. Again, I think Aaron Renn for me is such an important voice because he brings out pieces that almost nobody else brings out in terms of, as a conservative, a much more consistent conservative in terms of, hey, you know, there's whole areas in the West that we have basically completely abandoned what had been pretty standard Christian assumptions about individual behavior and responsibility, seeing just the pervasive use of gambling, just what has happened in terms of what has happened to television and use of images and all of this. It's a real shift from what we've seen. So not only should Jordan have basically had a tight speech, that again, as I've said on the live streams, the conference really needs to think through. They have a lot they need to think through. To whatever degree they can actually arrive at a consensus with respect to what this conference is for and how they're going to pursue it. Now, it's difficult because, of course, you've got a lot of pieces here. You've got different nations. You've got different agendas moving towards it. Again, a lot of these are movement conservatives.
All and good, but that's not the sort of main thrust of what the speech is actually about. But like I said, I'll probably have to talk about that in more detail because it's an absolute minefield he's stepping into. And I only know because I've done so much work on ideology. Anyway, so this is their YouTube channel. You can see the speeches on there in your own time, and it's quite interesting. The sort of the breadth of people. So as you can see there,
yeah, I saw the thumbnail reminded me, and I'd seen the clip come out that the singer guy, Oliver Anthony.
Yeah, Oliver Anthony was there.
Gave a speech, and he is not who I was expecting to see there.
No. So you've got like the normal subjects that these sort of conferences would have. So, the woke's gone too far this time. And actually, maybe we can use fossil fuels, actually. Maybe that's okay.
Oh, right, okay.
To do. Kemi Badenoch gave a speech. I actually haven't seen her speech. I didn't get there until after. I got there about midday on the first day, so I've been catching.
I did see her speech, and because I usually went to all the first plenary sessions, and then depending on who was speaking, I basically stayed in the area where I sent out a message. This is where we're going to meet, and if anybody's interested in doing an estuary meeting, come to this area, and I'll lead you out, and we'll do an estuary meeting. And so, and I didn't know who she was. I found her speech very interesting, as did Glenn Scrivener, and we'll have to get a chance to go to his. His was one of the first response videos out there to this. But there's a lot going on here. And Sargon, again, I never watched Sargon Avocado. I know who he is just because he's been around a while, and I sort of know what space he works in. But he's right that this is a tremendous minefield, and it has to be dealt with.
Catching up online, I haven't had time to watch.
Well, the quote given for it there: "The problem isn't liberalism; the problem is weakness."
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
That's not correct.
And that was Glenn Scrivener. Maybe it's a good time to talk about Glenn's. Glenn, where are you? Glenn, I didn't have as much chance to hang out with Glenn this time as I did last time. He did come to one of our estuary meetings, which was good. He could stay there for a little while. He cues off on Kemi's speech and weakness, and on what I thought was probably the most important speech, and ironically, the most controversial speech. I mean, who would have thought David Brooks is going to give a controversial speech? I really enjoyed his speech. It was my favorite speech of the conference, and it was very controversial. And I liked the speech for a whole range of reasons. Maybe at some point I'll get into the speech itself. But David Brooks has always been and I know a lot of you people don't like it. Well, you know me. I like Tim Keller. I like David Brooks. I'm a squish. Someone said that they saw me there and they thought, oh, you look like David French, so I must be a thorough squish. Because here, I don't follow David French. I know who he is, and I know why people criticize him. But Glenn basically goes after this weak thing, and I think this is a big piece of the tensions here. So Glenn spends most of his time on the David Brooks speech, the reality that David Brooks gets food. Oh, see, he spotted me. See, there I am in the crowd. There's Marcus from More Christ, and here's I won't add him by name. There's Benjamin Boyce and his wife. Spoke to him last year. Teaches religion at Eton. As people at the conference did notice, I'm easy to find in a crowd, and this was something that I noticed about my father years ago, because I'm very light, and I'm quite white, and I'm quite tall, so you just see kind of the din, and then you see me like a lighthouse shining out, so you can find me. Yeah, Glenn noted a number of people there. But yeah, more back to let's get back to Sargon and what he had to say.
Correct.
I like that the overall tone of this just seems to be 2016 Sargon.
Yeah, a lot of it.
One day they will catch up to you.
That's
10 years.
And this is a big thing. I might drop. So CBAX did yeoman's work at this conference, and there's a whole ARC playlist that you can follow CBAX and all of his stuff. He did some interviews from the floor. He did a whole bunch of things. He also covered Galway a little bit, and my first experience of an Orthodox liturgy, a Romanian liturgy. I had it with Paul Kingsnorth and CBAX and Martin Shaw, and it was a great, great day. But this theme that ARC, he says this is 2016 Sargon. And so, well, let's let this play out, and then maybe I'll drop a couple clips in there.
Is from now.
Well, Peterson and Douglas Murray gave a really good talk, actually. Really good speech. But the general tone is very much sort of 2016 Sargon. It's like, look, we just need to recommit to classical liberalism. And that would be nice, except that doesn't solve the problems. So it's too narrow an issue, too narrow a solution to a broad issue. And honestly, I spoke to loads of people about Badenoch's speech, and they were like, nah, it was rubbish, didn't like it. And I haven't watched it yet, so I'm going to watch it after this probably. But there's, like normal sort of things that we all consider to be real things. Like the most compelling argument against tech in schools is on there. It's why socialism...
From Big Sue's from Peep Show as well.
Is it?
Yeah, that's Big Sue's from Peep Show.
I had no idea. Okay.
I know.
I didn't recognise her at all.
I mean, she looks the same to me. She was not the kind of person I would expect to see at this kind of event, but
But that's fine, right? That's totally fine.
No, not that it's a problem.
Yeah, and I agree with it. I agree. Yeah, no, we really should be like worried. You know what? Right?
I don't know. They're talking about the woman that gave the talk about tech and education, and I didn't know. It just said actress. I have no idea who she is. But it was interesting because I thought the talk was, as many of the talks were, just sort of Douglas Murray gave a talk. It was exactly what I'd expect from a Douglas Murray talk. Konstantin Kisin gave a talk. It was exactly what I'd expect from a Konstantin Kisin. Now, many of these speeches, they were good speeches because they were set, and Kisin and Douglas Murray, I mean, They said exactly what you would expect them to say, and they said exactly what would be within the parameters of the conference. But many people are asking the question, well, what is this conference for? Is this supposed to just give us these rah-rah moments about this certain thing? And, well, we're going to get to, well, let's let him finish, and then we'll get to some other stuff.
I got a bunch of, they were giving out... just blank notebooks and pens so you can make notes. And I was like, oh, are they free? Are they? Great. So I took 4, right, for my kids.
See, you're the problem. Your hedonistic nature, Carl.
Like, it was selfless. It wasn't for me. I was taking it for my kids, right? And I literally handed one out to my son this morning. And he was like, oh, thanks, Dad. And I'm like, it's a blank notebook, but I didn't say that. But he was thrilled with it. He was absolutely thrilled with it. And so he sat there just, because
This is how deprived you leave your kids. No video games except for 2 hours on the weekend. Yeah. You'll take your blank notebook and you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, but do you know what he started doing? He started making up Bannerlord formations.
Oh, right, okay.
So he's there going, look, Dad, I gave him it like really early. But the infant get me again. I've got a photo. I'll show you. Blah 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 blah. Yeah, Oliver Anthony being there was interesting. And he does represent a kind of American class, a working class, right? And there was quite a nice sense from the people in this, the top layer, that they do have obligations to those people at the bottom, right? And they weren't trying to be elitist, actually, which was quite refreshing to see. And
okay, and of course you've got some strong Christian voices in the Strouds. I don't know where Paul Marshall stands with respect to faith or not, but of course the Strouds are very serious, legitimate Christians. David Stroud is a pastor. His wife Philippa, Baroness, member of the House of Lords, or perhaps in the past conservative. And if you search for them on YouTube, you will find them doing other various conferences. They do a lot of work in the church. So that's a huge part of this conference is the question of, okay, how religion and politics, how do they line up? Can you actually have a consensus? All of, I think, the really big issues that we are struggling with, and this is where the struggles about liberalism and post-liberalism really come to the fore. Maybe what I'll do now is I'll drop. So CBAX had, let's see, he's got this whole live stream. He had a bunch of.
We edited out. So.
Oops.
Dig it.
Oops.
All right. We edited.
And.
Like, what are they doing right now?
So he had a very interesting little interview with Malcolm Collins, and. So I saw Malcolm Collins there. I immediately recognized him with his glasses, and we had a lovely conversation. Many of the points that he made to me and Rafe Kelly, I did a lot of hanging out with Rafe at this thing again. Many of the points that he made to me, he made right there to CBAX, which is super helpful because now Malcolm and I disagree on whole bunches of things, but his critique of the conference, I think, is, okay, what is this conference for? What is supposed to happen here? Is this a conference for sending out information? Is this a conference for processing? How do those pieces fit together in the conference? And one of the things, I'm not going to get to it in this video, but I want to do a lot more talking about lion culture and fox culture, because I think that's a really good way to begin to get a handle on things. And after I flew back to London after my trip to the Netherlands and Germany doing the estuary thing. I flew back to London. Cassidy had me in a hotel that was right on this network of parks, Kensington Park, Hyde Park, and then another park by some more palaces. And so I walked those parks and I saw a ton of monuments, and boy, is it just crystal clear lion culture. And this conference is all about getting back to lion culture. But there's no just getting back there. It's not going to work that way. And you're actually going to have to navigate these questions of civilization and religion if you want to get there. So I'm going to drop Malcolm's speech right in here, or Malcolm's talk with CBEX right in here.
All right, what's up, everybody? I'm here with Malcolm Collins from Based Camp.
Hello.
Many will recognize the dark-rimmed glasses from the internet.
Yes.
We bumped into each other a few times here at ARC, and I just wanted to kind of ask him and get his perspective on what happened here and what are your overall thoughts?
Well, I think ARC is a great microcosm for understanding why the conservative movement in the United Kingdom is failing and it is succeeding in the United States. At this conference, there were many times where I saw somebody up on stage that was speaking to an audience which included somebody who was an expert on the same topic, had more expertise, had more followers, had more exposure, but was spicy publicly or politically. And what this became is not a conference about solving our fundamental issues, right, as a country or the UK's, but about class status signaling. That's what you're doing when you remove all of the spiciest, when you remove the people who are saying, our biggest issue, like J.D. Vance recently said in Munich, is the mass flood of immigrants into these countries. And it is a much bigger issue here in Europe than it ever was in the United States. Like it is at a scale that is incomparable. And yet they are not yelling it from the rooftops. They are not talking about the censorship fascist state that they are all living under and must be torn down. And yet they have people here who are taking pot shots at Donald Trump for being not couth or whatever. I had somebody here who was like, yeah, we need to be real conservatives and get back to things like banning gay marriage and not banning US aid. And I was like, how can you have such a bad take? Like, nobody fucking cares about gay marriage anymore. But US aid was the worst. Like, why did you think that was okay? And he's like, well, it helps our relation with other, I was like, yeah, Africa, that they really love us for pushing LGBT stuff down their throats. That's gonna really help our reputation with South America. Like, do you have any idea what these cultures are? Like, this is just cultural imperialism, if I want to put it in leftist terms. But my point being is that there is a faction of the old right that is terrified of the transition we are seeing within our party, which is the type of stuff that we see Trump and Elon doing. Like, what are they doing right now? They're not out there like banning gay marriage or anything. They're out there taking apart the oligarchical super state that has taken over the United States and currently still runs Europe and the EU, that was making laws, was unelected politicians, taking our money and just burning it on stupid things, and taking apart departments that are attempting to systematically brainwash our children into a cultural group that's not having kids itself. That's what we need to be fighting against, not all of these like vaguely, let's ban pornography and complain about climate regulation, like whatever. Like that's not fun, that's not interesting. Anyway, so I think we need to get spicier and we need to focus on the parts of the culture war that are existential rather than aesthetic.
What would be 2 examples of existential?
Well, for example, if gay marriage ID is a perfect example of aesthetic. Allowing 2 people who are already gay, we're not gonna make them not gay by banning marriage, getting married, completely pointless fight that's just gonna lose us elections. Children being systemically brainwashed in the public education system into sterilizing themselves, that's existential because that can affect my kids in my family. Even somebody who wouldn't have gone down that life path can be suckered into that life path. That's existential. Or the scale of the government bureaucracy making it too expensive to handle infrastructure projects, that's an existential issue because now we cannot fix basic infrastructure that's eroding. Or fertility collapse, that's an existential societal issue. Or unchecked immigration, that's especially existential in countries like Germany where they're just not gonna exist in 100 years as like a meaningful German state. And yet they're here fighting about like banning pornography is not existential, right? Like it's a largely irrelevant aesthetic fight for a few people to out-conservative other people. And not an issue of survival of the country. The fact that I can be arrested in this country for memes or praying in my own house, that is existential because that prevents me from sharing ideas. And if I can't share ideas, you don't have a free idea competition, and the government can control what you think and what you say and what you do, and they can stamp out any movement that's seen as too conservative or too religious, and yet they're not fighting stuff like that here.
Well, I was hoping that you would actually tell me what you really thought, but
no,
But thank you for that. What has Base Camp got coming up for 2025?
Oh, a lot of spicy stuff. I don't know. Like with the Trump administration being in power, right now we are seeing what it can only be described as a political blitzkrieg. Like the Ardell line was passed on day one. The progressives, like the French, set up this giant series of trenches. They're like, okay, we're all ready. We've got all the guns, and now we're like week 2 and Paris is under siege. And they're all looking around at the Ardell like, what the just happened? And I think even many conservatives, I don't think I've ever elected a politician or worked to elect a politician and been as satisfied with what's happening as right now. And so I think for a lot of us, we're just sitting down right now and being like, oh my God, like, can we actually fix this? Like for a lot of what the American conservative movement was becoming, in the direction I was looking at going and my family was looking at going, was, well, what you basically need to do is wall yourself off from outside culture, build something that works for you and your kids. Yeah, Benedictine, build a counter society. And now we've got the triumvirate out there literally fixing this. And I'm like, oh shit, like, maybe. We got to keep the pressure on. We've got to keep pushing forwards. We've got to prevent people from getting indulgent. Like, we need to make sure that we don't develop our own trans movement. Whatever the trans movement was to the left, where everyone should have known, like the moment they start doing this stuff in sports or start doing this stuff to kids, like kick them out of the bus. Like that's not what we're about. And it sunk, I think, a huge part of their ability to win elections. And we need to keep in mind within our own movement, as we look around, the parts of the right that are pushing for things that are never ever going to get passed in the current political ecosystem, because those things will just lose us elections, and we need to keep winning elections so we can keep actually fixing stuff so that it's easier for our own children to actually survive and thrive and get out there and do the world. So I guess right now I'm sort of in this period of, and I think a lot of us are, is rethinking what's possible in the new ecosystem, with legacy media basically dying on the floor at this point. I remember I had a thought recently, you know, when you ask what's next for Basecamp, I was like, oh shit, I can probably get a job at a company again. Like I was non-political, whatever, and now I'm like, hey, maybe I can, because you know, I've like, that's my background. I used to work in like running large sort of, like the Stanford MBA, like large, like McKinsey type stuff, or like running large companies. And I was like, I can actually get like a senior executive position at like maybe push Disney or something. We'll see. I think what I might be, the big project I've been thinking about working on next is I've got the AI video game, which I'm very excited about, that I'm building, about a post-demographic apocalypse. But the other project I'm really excited about potentially moving forwards with is a DEI remediation consulting firm. To begin working to rip this stuff out of companies and play the old progressive game of threatening them with legal action, saying, you know, this stuff is legally racist now. If you don't allow me to come in and fix it, you're going to have to deal with my friends at the Heritage Foundation, who would very much like to sue you.
Well, that's... Somebody was bringing the spice to ARC. I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe it
I
was
think
you.
they're the reason I wasn't on stage here. Let's put it that way. They don't want me going up and being
right.
like,
dude, it was nice to meet you.
Yeah, good to see you.
All right, man.
Now, I met Aaron at the conference, and he had thoughts too. Let's listen to a few of his thoughts.
Placed in an area that's had a little bit of trouble in London, which only highlighted the importance, I suppose, of the conference itself. This is the conference that is put on by Jordan Peterson, and it is, again, a kind of answer to the WEF.
It's important to note that whereas, again, David and Philippa Stroud, you can find like the Everything Conference. You can find them doing various different kinds of conferences, usually specifically Christian conferences, and you can find those things on YouTube. But they are tiny. They are TLC size or smaller than this conference. This conference gets its bulk from Jordan Peterson. There's absolutely no question about it.
Recognizing that you are going to have some level of counter elite if you want to organize a real response to Klaus Schwab and the others that are kind of trying to do this global governance thing. Now, there are other conferences out there in a similar vein. NatCon, one that I spoke at in DC.
Now, it's interesting to me what people compare this to, because in terms of when people go to this conference, what do they compare it to? Now, I tend to compare it to church conferences. CBACs tended to compare it to youth events. People might have compared it to trade shows. The nomos of the airport. Mary Harrington is so good. Wow, she is so good. She is so sharp. The nomos of the airport. Others compare it to, let's say, political events. So he compares it to these sort of conservative political events. So that's the lens that they're seeing it through.
Last year, And I'll do a little bit of compare and contrast with these two because I do think there's an important emphasis that really changed the way that the conference was handled. I want to say at the outset that I do think there were positives about this conference. A lot of people, I tweeted out one or two things about some of the worst negatives, and of course that's what gets highlighted. So I'd like to say at the beginning that I like Jordan Peterson. Don't agree with him on everything, obviously, but I think he's ultimately a force for good, even though ups and downs around. I respect the fact that he is putting out the kind of efforts necessary to organize something like this. Understand that this is a huge step. That's a big undertaking. And so anyone really putting themselves out and trying to build alternative institutions, that's what we talk about all the time. So while I might have some critiques here or there, understand that they are ultimately constructive critiques. I appreciate the level of effort put into something like this. I also really respect some of the people involved, guys like Jonathan Pajot, Mary Harrington, other people who are involved in advising what's going on, who are on stage, James Poulos. These are people who are wired in. They kind of understand what's going on. So what you really had in this scenario was a wide tent in a way that even NatCon isn't. NatCon is a wide tent for American conservatism, but this goes well beyond, right? This is an international event. I heard a quarter of the attendees were from the United States, but of course you had large contingents from the UK, from Canada, from Australia. It did seem to mainly be focused on Anglosphere countries, though you had people from France and others as well, but it definitely felt like the Anglosphere was heavily focused on and represented at the conference. But this is international, and it's also not specifically right-wing or conservative. You do have a good conservative showing. I think anyone who's a leftist would probably have identified everyone there as a right-winger. But as someone who is a right-winger, I could easily recognize that a good chunk of the people, well, I mean, it's Jordan Peterson, so it's the IDW coalition, right? It's moderate conservatives, centrists, and moderate liberals who all kind of want to oppose the more radical, globalist, progressive agenda. So it's kind of exactly who you would expect it to be. It's a lot of the IDW crowd.
Now, right there, he noted that a lot of this conference is reactive. It's against wokeism, and that comes in true again. And again, part of what Pajot said is that to whatever degree, and this gets into fox culture versus lion culture. Lion culture does not care what its enemies do because they're lions. Fox culture is watching their enemies. They're calculating their enemies, and that makes them in some ways dependent upon their enemies. And you can go back, and if you look up in Jonathan Pajot's video on parasitic storytelling, it's super helpful because fox culture is always at the mercy of other larger figures. And part of what is interesting about the ARC conference is that for all of the ways they want to sort of embody lion culture, they are mostly taking plays from fox culture playbooks.
Guys like Douglas Murray, ladies like Ayan Hirsi Ali, Eric Weinstein, the guys that have been in circling this whole thing for a long time, they're heavily represented. And you could see this in the speakers and the presenters who were on stage. And that was kind of my first, I would say, criticism or constructive criticism with the conference. It was very main stage focused. And one of the problems that you have with a large tent is, of course, not everybody's on board with the same thing, which isn't a problem. Ultimately, it's a good thing if you're trying to resolve some of the problems inside of a coalition. However, if you only have a main stage where people are doing presentations and very little back and forth, very little dialogue, then it becomes difficult to actually resolve any of those contradictions inside your coalition, and you really just end up with the people with the highest profile preaching to the choir that they always preach to. Many of the speeches were long, took up most of the time. There's usually a panel that followed the speeches, but they were almost always extremely short, just a few minutes for each speaker. They only had maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and they were never actually really interacting with each other for the most part. There wasn't a lot of debate happening. And so if the purpose of the conference is to resolve differences in the coalition, having a main stage focus conference where very little discussion occurred makes that pretty difficult. And you can see that reflected over and over again. Everyone I talked to would say, hey, yeah, they finally got to some of the things that I wanted to hear, the things that I wanted to understand. And everybody who was discussing it got like 2 minutes and then it was time to go to the next thing. Some of the speeches were great. I'm not saying that there weren't good speeches there. I'm just saying that because there was so little interaction ultimately between different positions, or even acknowledgement often of different positions inside, you didn't really get much. Like, you kind of had a free trade versus tariffs thing, and that was more or less the extent to which we saw significant differences on stage. Now, I should say at the outset that I attended an okay number of the talks, but ultimately these conferences are much more about what happens in kind of the meeting rooms. It's about the networking, the connections made, and the people you're talking to, as much as it is about the speeches on stage. So if you're just looking at the plenary speeches, then you're missing the point of the conference. If you only spend your time listening, if you ever go to one of these things, if you spend your time only listening to the speakers, then you're missing out on what the conference is really about. So I didn't see every one of these. Maybe some super base stuff happened or some really big debates happened in the ones I wasn't in. I really can't speak to that. I can only talk about the ones that I saw. One contrast between NatCon and this conference is that NatCon had the main stage, but then it had breakout sessions after every main stage discussion. And so you could go to the main stage and it had the guys you...
Now I'm going to drop a couple of the little clips. I'm going to drop Bethel's analysis, and then I'm going to drop a couple of the little talks that I gave CBACs about. There are many, many, many different ways to organize a big event like this. And I've made this speech a number of times. I don't know if they're just not thinking about it, but churches have played with these events a lot. It sounds like, other conferences have played with them a lot. It all boils down to, what exactly is your purpose for this event? What do you want to do? Now, part of what was interesting in that, at the end of the first night, they had this reception, which they sort of used as a way to try to talk at us some more. And then the next night they had a dinner, which they used again as a way to talk at us some more. And in fact, one of the guys I had in the estuary sat exactly across the table from me in the dinner thing, and I never got a chance to talk to him. And it wasn't finally until he came with Glenn Scrivener to the estuary thing, because he was curious about it, that I got a chance to get to know the guy. So, and I was happy to get to know him, and I could hear a little bit of his story, and so again and again. But one of the interesting moments that happened at that dinner thing, I went to the Civilization one. CBACs basically said the best thing that went to the conference was actually the AI breakout, had some of the youngest audience at it. But it was very interesting because one person came up and basically said, we're sitting here and we're hearing most of these speeches, sermons, and they're all sort of vague. Why don't you give us some political action points that we can implement in our country in order to sort of move the thing forward? And David Stroud said, this is not a political conference. This is a cult. We're trying to make cultural impact. And I thought, well, at least he's clear on what they're trying to do. I don't know that the organization of the conference is clear in terms of what they're trying to do, because if my agenda were primarily cultural, I would not organize it in this way. This is not the nomos of the airport. This is not the way I would do it at all. So a lot of these critiques, and what was really interesting to me is hearing a lot of these critiques from people who are coming at this conference from a very different position. They were going to it mostly as a sort of political event, and to them, it's just kind of outdated, and there's not really any processing.
You would expect it had the big politicians, it had the big headline names, but then you would go to the different breakout sessions and they would be focused on very specific issues. they would have a short, 5 to 10 minute speech from each person on the panel, and then a good amount of actual back and forth, both between the panelists and then questions from the audience. And this created an atmosphere where it felt like we were really getting perspectives more often, right? We're drilling down into very specific issues and collections of people who are addressing those issues. And also much more time was given for debate if you wanted to understand them. Now, obviously that creates a different atmosphere because you're definitely not going to hear everything at NatCon. There's just no way to do that. Between the main stage speakers and the breakouts, no one could attend anything. And so that meant you kind of had to find what you cared about, lock in on that, and then kind of recognize that some of that's going to go by the wayside. If you're someone who's trying to consume every, big tier speaker, then the ARC format works better for that because everyone's kind of brought in. There's like 4,000 people at the conference. It was huge. However, that also means that there's very little discussion, debate. Now, again, a lot of this happens once you leave those main discussions. Once you go into they have like this big meeting hall with all the vendors and meeting places you get together where the food would be and all that stuff. And you could go there and you would meet up with people and talk. And obviously there you could do some networking. But again, because you didn't have the kind of tributaries flowing out from the main river, it was easy to get lost. If you didn't know who you were looking for, then it could be difficult to network. Luckily, I know a lot of the people there. It was a very good opportunity to meet a lot of people that I've only ever, been on their show, or they've only ever been on my show, or we've, kind of tweeted at each other. Never got to have a one-on-one conversation. And so in that sense, I'm luckier than most. But if I was just someone thrown into the deep end of this pool, not knowing anyone, not knowing what was going on, I don't think I would have been able to find easily kind of what was happening. Now, they have an app, and the app lets you kind of message people, make connections, and that was...
Now, because I had gone before, I knew it was coming, so I could make some preparations this time. So I basically connected with the people that I knew I wanted to talk to, that I figured would probably also want to talk to me, and I told them where they could find me because I was always at the same place. Now, that limited me sort of roaming around and making new people, and then organized a couple of estuary sessions while, during the conference. Jordan Hall, I met him on the first day, and he said, I'm not going to any of the plenary sessions. And he actually sort of snuck into one, and I was sitting by the door because I wanted to see a little bit of it and then leave. And I said, why are you in here? And he said, well, all of my friends are presenting in this one, so I thought, well, maybe I should go in. But he was in for all of 3 minutes, and he went out of there because that was basically what he decided. Okay, so I'm going to drop in some of the other videos here. Bethel's conversation with CBAX, a couple of conversations with me and CBAX that basically get at this question of how the conference is arranged, what the conference is for, how is it organized.
Andrew Clay, what are your initial thoughts, ARC Day 1?
Watch my video from after ARC Day 1 last year. Everything in that video still holds. Number 2, I don't think they learned anything. They clearly didn't watch my videos. They clearly didn't take it to heart. The value of this conference is between the 4,000 amazing human beings that are here, and they are not doing much to facilitate. There's Bethel McGrew. She has to jump. The value of this conference is between people, and they still have not really figured out how to facilitate that. And in fact, what enraged me, which now CBAX knows why I don't drink, because I don't drink to maintain impulse control, because I had an impulse that I repressed. Because even in I skipped the evening things last time. I didn't go to any of them. No, I did go to one. But even last year was far better than this year. But this thing that they put us in for supposedly maximizing our relationship with one another was the most inhospitable, inhuman. And then they had the nerve to get us in there with food and drink and yell at us for stopping. I mean, it was complete bait and switch. They say, come in here and you'll be able to mix with anybody. And they didn't set up the mixing at all, because what they did was they had a stage and they're like, ding, 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 stop talking with one another so we can spend this next time yelling at you about whatever agenda we have. And
it was crazy. I hated it.
And God bless them and their agenda. My argument is not with their agenda. My argument is I don't think they have thought through what they are doing. There's the rant
That's
that
good enough
will
for me.
that will go
Just
viral.
ignored it and kept talking with
Wait,
each other.
wait.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I'm
talking to
taking
it.
over the show. Some of us just ignored it and kept talking with each other. So like I met these two geeky guys who do stop motion animation, and we were just like in the way back. We couldn't even hear what they were saying on the stage, and we just talked about like animation and art and stuff. It was really sweet, and so we just ignored whatever. So like I don't know what they're thinking or why. It's like this is the designated time to talk to people.
To mix.
Right.
There's no other time like this at the
And
whole
they
conference.
They need an estuary-like thing. So tomorrow I am going to implement estuary. The estuary side stream is happening tomorrow. I talked about it today, but I was a little nervous. I didn't know if anybody was going to. And then people said, when are we doing the estuary? But I couldn't do it at 4 o'clock because I had to listen to Peugeot. I had to support my boy Peugeot. I had to be in there. I had to see Mary Harrington. I sat next to Bethel. I got her commentary the whole time. It was unrecorded.
I recorded it.
Well, she recorded it. Well, she's got her commentary. But tomorrow we are, in fact, going to implement the ARC estuary side stream project because the
rebellion.
people are demanding it.
It's true.
The people are demanding it. In fact, at one point late in the afternoon, I heard they're looking for you, Paul. They want to know where you're doing the estuary, and I couldn't because that was Peugeot's time. But tomorrow, it is happening. Not in the morning. I'm going to go to the first session, but then the middle of the day, or a lot of the middle of the day, we will be doing estuary.
I have a podcast for like 2 that I have to do with Justin Brierley, but I want to do estuary, so I'm pretty sure he wants to record at 2 o'clock, and he tells me it'll only be half an hour, and so hopefully that won't overlap too
Justin's
much.
good to his word on those kind of things.
He is good to his word,
He is-
yeah.
He is the boss. This for Justin Brierley has to be like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, this is what Justin Brierley lives for.
Yes.
This is like Justin Brierley. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a wealthy man. I can do podcasts forever just from the people in this room.
That's
so
true. That's true. Thank you, Paul. We're gonna get more corner content tomorrow. More man on the
Benjamin
streets.
Boyce
I got
in the
Benjamin.
picture?
He was my first this morning.
Oh, good.
So yeah, because he was the first person I saw that I.
You should get him in.
Yeah, dude, come here. You're working here at ARC, right?
Yes,
As
I am.
a help, and remind me of your name.
I'm Elliot.
Elliot.
Paul Vanderklay is so famous that they have taught all the people with these white ARC shirts, they've told them they have to watch every single one of my videos, and they are tested on it.
It was required watching for pre-ARC for him to watch PVK.
Yeah, I'm the little corner guy inside ARC.
He's the plant.
Yeah, exactly.
He's
the
he's the agent.
It's not just here. I try to do stuff all over. But yes, it's fun.
Awesome. Well, dude, thank you so much, man. All right, till tomorrow.
Hello. Hi.
Hello. I am here with many of y'all know Miss Bethel McGrew.
Yes.
Bethel, let's start out with this. You've had some really awesome opportunities to be on some podcasts. You've been invited to be on some pretty prominent podcasts. Can you tell us about that experience and who you've been talking to at ARC?
Yeah. Well, so actually before ARC, last Friday, I did something with John Anderson, who's the former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, and he has this talk show. It's kind of like what Peter Robinson does with Common Sense, and so he was really lovely, and he had a lovely team with him. We met in this nice kind of posh club library room. It was very cool, but it was kind of like shooting a movie because it was really grueling. He and I were both super jet lagged. He had just got off the plane, and he was telling me that for him his body clock was saying it was deep middle of the night.
Oh, yeah.
So he and I both kept messing up, actually. But they were like, no, it's okay. Like, if you mess up, just, take a pause, say it again. It'll all come out in the edit. And, yeah, we were both very professional about it and just kind of kept going. Listen to me. I'm so tired.
That's right.
So he had all kinds of questions about just different areas, things I've written about. It kind of went all over the place, so not sure how they're going to edit it together, but I assume it'll be cool. But that was a cool and fun experience.
Because it was a really studio kind of thing.
It was a studio. It wasn't itself a studio, but it was a studio kind of environment. Yeah, where they were
much like what we're doing right now, actually.
Well, yeah, very funny. Well, and so then, actually, what I did here at ARC was then yesterday Justin Brierley had me do a couple of Justin's been interviewing a ton of people. And so what I didn't realize is that they've got like these, special kind of tiny soundproofed little podcast tiny rooms upstairs somewhere. So he hadn't like told me exactly where he was doing these things. So I come down after our estuary thing, which wrapped up at, I don't know, like 1:30. So I quickly grabbed the super fancy lunch, and I'm like walking around scarfing that down. I'm like, okay, gotta go find Justin. So he had said he had a podcast booth. I thought, great, okay, so is it like one of these things around here at the hall? Like, is this gonna be like we're standing up and talking over the crowd? How's this gonna work? So I'm like back and forth, where's Justin? He's not there. And I was like in a panic because I couldn't find him. So I'm like, Dustin, help me out. I don't see you. Where are you? He's like, oh, I'm upstairs. Oh, okay. So I finally got there in time, and it all worked out, and had a lovely chat with first with James Lindsay, who actually, so fun fact, years ago when I was writing under a pen name, I did a podcast with James and Justin and my friend Neil Shenvey, who writes a lot on critical race theory and stuff. And that was before I'd come out and written under my own name, so this is a fun kind of reunion.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
And I met James in person for the first time last year, and he and my dad are kind of friendly, and so so that was a nice kind of relaxed chat. And then Carl Benjamin came in, who I don't really know Carl. I just know he's like kind of a dissident right.
Gamergate.
Yeah, right. Okay, I vaguely know about that. I don't really keep up with that stuff. But Justin's like, well, hey, if you want to, we could have another. I'm like, sure, I'll just like. And then like come to find out, he's a big C.S. Lewis fan, which is cool.
I think he got a master's in philosophy recently.
Oh,
Possibly.
did he?
Yeah,
Really?
something along those lines.
Okay. Well, so anyway, we just kind of like riffed on, religion, atheism, and C.S. Lewis, and so that was fun. He's very, very different from James, very British, and talking about how he kind of drags himself to church because it's good for the kids. It's
Interesting.
Kind of, yeah, he's sort of in that era.
Yeah, that journey, that part of the
yeah,
journey.
yeah. So yeah, we'll see what comes of
So,
that.
another question. You were involved in Paul's estuary yesterday.
Yeah.
Can you give me your thoughts about what Paul's doing with estuary at ARC, and your experience with that yesterday?
Yeah, that was really sweet, and people were very vulnerable. They were very raw. They were sharing all kinds of stuff, And I mean, at times I was almost like, okay, maybe, but I mean, it's kind of the nature of the conversation. I'm really struck by how atomized we are as a society, how lonely people are. We discussed this some in the podcast episode that we did.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate what Paul is doing. I think Paul's an excellent facilitator. He knows how to get a conversation going. He knows how to kind of connect threads, steer things in a fruitful direction. He's obviously had lots and lots of practice doing that. And he's a very sensitive, very patient, and he's good at including people who are maybe a little more shy. He's good at kind of drawing those people out. So yeah, I wish that sort of thing. But actually, like somebody left a comment on your post who lives in Lansing, where I am. It's like, oh hey, I'd like to maybe do that sort of thing. So I actually replied, and so that would be cool. I didn't even know that somebody like that was in Lansing. It's not a very happening town.
And that's where you're at?
Yeah, that's where I'm at in Michigan.
So, and then last question, and thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Is, so your thoughts on ARC overall? This is the last day, so kind of overall thoughts.
I was chatting about this with my friend Ben Sixsmith, who's an English journalist, and we were both kind of agreeing that ARC is a very sort of like high-minded but kind of confused project that's not quite sure what it wants to be when it grows up. You have like a bunch of different streams kind of colliding, and you have speakers who are saying stuff that we all kind of agree with, and maybe the speakers are kind of cool, but it's like the speakers are, the way Ben put this, is the speakers are the excuse to have the conference. They're like not all that interesting in and of themselves. Like they're not saying mind-blowingly original creative stuff we've never heard them say before. But if they weren't up there, then all of us wouldn't have picked this particular time and place to be. So in a way, I as I try to think about, okay, well, how would I design this instead? I'd have to give it some thought because, it's like Ben and I were agreeing. We wouldn't all be here having these fun connections with each other if there wasn't some kind of a unifying higher status reason, right?
Yeah, that was my conversation with Marcus, who runs the channel More Christ, and did the Christ and Culture conference. He had a really good perspective, is that this kind of allows us to actually, in a sense, like hide in the shadow of the bigger unifying in our little areas, like in that we kind of can take that for granted. So I thought that was a really charitable thing. Like sometimes it's easy to poke the big thing, critique but we're all here. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm thankful for that. I'm so thankful for the connections I've made. And I mean, it's interesting. Little things have happened where I'll think, oh, if I'd gone to that party, or if I'd hung around at that place, I could have connected with that high status person I like. But then I think, if I had done that, then I wouldn't have been over here to connect with this rando and have this conversation, which had then this sweet effect later. And so I'm okay. I'm okay with that. It's really interesting. Yeah.
That's like something like being open to the Logos or the Spirit.
Or something.
Yeah.
Logos, man.
All right. Thank you, Bethel.
Thank you so much.
Your second estuary meeting at ARC. You didn't do estuary last time you were here.
Correct.
But, what really prompted you to decide to just did you think about it that you were going to do it before you got here or after you got here?
Before.
Okay, so
this was a plan that I had because I was last time at ARC we had the plenary sessions, and then we had kind of conversations, like stand-up conversations where you sort of meet people and you get to know them a little bit. But again, as I talked about in the video, the live stream that I made, your eyes are always looking out for a bigger name, and you really that's really hard. And then once I started skipping plenaries last time, then I was having some deeper conversations in the back, but you still it was still difficult because it was difficult to focus. And so I thought, if I come back to ARC, I want to do some estuary sessions.
So
because there's such amazing people at ARC. The beauty of this place has been who it grabs in. That's been the really cool thing. But my frustration was they grabbed so many cool people and I can't talk to them.
Yeah.
I can't talk to them the way I want to talk to them.
So I know, we literally just finished the second one, but do you have, how do you feel about the estuary sessions that you did?
I laughed, I cried, it changed my life. No. Part of that, and whenever you do something, it never quite meets expectations. So I'm used to, at Livingstone's, we have every week estuary. And I did that estuary retreat in October. And what you see is that when you, just like a church retreat or something like that, the intensity builds as you continue because you get to know people and you establish trust and people go more personal. And of course you can't quite do this, but at the same time, I am more satisfied than last time because Andy is here. Andy was not here last time. And it isn't just because Andy is here, and it isn't just because I had a Randos conversation with Andy that I really loved, but because Andy was at both estuary sessions. And so my relationship with Andy just got to another level now.
Yeah.
And the same with Philip. And you were at both estuary sessions, but your staff, I can't get close to you because that would be, inappropriate. So.
The worship leader Paul didn't want. So that leads me to ask about make sure I got, ARC is in the background here. So ARC and estuary, how could you see this being, the protocol being implemented in a group of several thousand?
I'm probably going to have to make a video about this, but what we are doing, so first we had the estuaries, and now the estuaries are playing with conferences, a level of gathering one above. And what all those estuaries are doing with that level of conferences is they are playing with strategies of doing things. So at the Chino Estuary Conference, and this was not my idea, it was John Van Donk's idea, when people first came to register, they were swirled off into a little group right away. And they did introduction and a little bit of pitching, but not much more. And that reminded, and that worked really well. Why? So after we did it, And this is the way change happens. Change doesn't happen because you're a mega mind and you think it all ahead and then you implement. No, you try stuff out and you see what fails and what works. So when he did that and it worked, I realized a few things. Number one, many people come to this conference alone or almost alone. Number two, then they're anxious the first day. They feel insecure. They don't know who to sit by. They don't know who to eat with. They're just kind of and human beings don't like that. We need groups. When you started university, there was freshman orientation. The first thing they did was they took everyone and they put them in little groups. Now, probably after the first week you thought, I'll be best friends with all of these people forever at college, and you weren't. But you had a little group to start with until you could more organically meet other people. So when people come to a conference like this, the first thing you do is you send them off into a little group. And you can fool them, maybe even lie. This is orientation to the conference. But then you do a little bit of estuary group thing so then from that first thing, then you go to the first plenary where there's an introduction and an orientation to the conference. This is where the purpose of the conference is clear. And this is where the expectations are set. And then you have a little coffee hour where maybe they had some other friends that missed the orientation, they weren't with them. So now they've got two groups of friends. They possibly have a group of friends that they came with or that they knew or expected to see, and they have the new friends that they made in their first group. And then you go into the first big message section where there's some presentation that's designed to stir the pot a little bit and encourage. I mean, I think you need to raise some dissonance, otherwise it just gets too preachy. So then after that big session, you have coffee again, but then you go back to your first groups. And that's where you start doing the estuary thing. And that's when people, well, what happened in that stir the pot thing? Oh, that brought these things, and you put it in there. And when with a group as highly capable as the people they are attracting here, boy, are those groups going to be something. I mean, look at this guy, look at this guy, look at this guy, look at that guy, look at this guy. I mean, this is the kind of groups, these are really high potent groups, and you're going to get, and so then you run permutations of this as it goes, and then you can play with like breakout groups of different size, but you keep going back on a regular basis to that initial group. And what that means is, guess what? Almost everybody in that group, or some of those people in that group, they came connected with other groups, and when you start hitting an idea, they'll say, oh, I want you to meet this person over here because they're really on that. And so what you begin to do at the conference is you weave together a fabric. It's because what happens at the end of a conference? So I've got my notes, I've got my little brochures, they're giving us books, I got my swag, I got all that stuff, but going back to regular life is like driving your car in a river. You have all these ideas, how we're gonna do it, I'm gonna change this, and you hit in that river, it's like whoosh, and off you go. In the conference, maybe one or two things remains. But the conference hasn't done anything. So what you've done is now suddenly something has happened in you. You've got a network around you of strangers, and maybe 2 or 3 of those people will remain, and you might even have a connection to a bigger name. And with the kind of people they're pulling through with these conferences, you could do a lot.
Yeah.
And so I left a lot of this feedback after conference number 1. Sounds like you left feedback about badges. They gave us chance for feedback. I used it. I used my YouTube platform. I made videos about ARC. I'm very blunt. Some people say, hey, don't shit where you eat or bite the hand that feeds you. But it's like, you know, what do I got to lose, huh? What I got to lose? So, and I think what they have to lose is a lot more, because there's a level of frustration around here. If it's not done well, that will mean next year, well, they might jigger the rules so they can have 10,000 instead of 4,000, but that's not you want to grow a movement where there's more demand than supply, because that then gets other things going. Yeah. So that is what I would say. Jordan, Philippa, Paul, Marshall, there it is. I'm giving it to you.
There it is.
Don't even need to give me a ticket next year if you don't want to. I don't care. Just do it great. Bless the world, right? That's what I hear.
Paul, thank you. it doesn't sound like you've really put much thought into that, but I appreciate you taking the time to try to answer that question anyways. So.
Only for you. See, that's only for you.
All right, we're moving on.
Bethel has a Substack on day 1. I guess her day 2 and day 3 are behind her little paywall. She mentions it somewhere. So she mostly told stories. Maybe she'll get more into perspective in the other. Part of what was interesting is that Jonathan Peugeot, for patrons, just released a video on ARC and the duality of our present moment. And this was a very interesting video because he actually used it to get into a bit of a retrospective over his 8 years of being involved in this space. He talked quite a bit about Ayaan Hirsi Ali and her transformation into Christianity. He gets into, this was I made a transcript of it, and he gets into, let's see where he does. It's a Patreon video, so if you want to see the video, I don't know what level of Patreon participation or level of symbolic world tier you need to get at the video. I've been on Patreon for Jonathan Peugeot almost right from the start, because he starts out with basically an appeal for Jonathan Peugeot is a super important player in this space, and actually in this video he asked for prayer because what he's trying to do in the symbolic world is really hard. I didn't spend as much time with sort of the symbolic world cohort as I did last time, partly because I sort of set up my own shop in the back. And so I spent more time with corner people, and there were more corner people this time than last time. But I did spend some time with some really key symbolic world people, and I want to get a couple of them on the channel because they're sort of behind the scenes. You might not know who they are, but they're really wonderful, excellent, capable, competent, important people. And so I'd like to raise their visibility and probably get them to play more in the corner. So in this portion of the talk, he's talking about Ayaan Hirsi Ali's journey and how in the first ARC conference she sort of mentions that she's exploring Christianity. And that's when you sort of got into this question, the utilitrad question, which keeps haunting this conference, because what is the relationship of this religious foundation to this lion culture civilization that really is dependent on, this is where I think Kemi Bandanau, this is where she was bringing in this question of confidence, as was Philippa Stroud. And actually, I think, and Ayaan Hirsi Ali continues to raise this question of confidence, but that was part of the point of the Stuart Smalley live stream video that I made. I'll drop this in the ARC playlist, so if you're curious about those live streams, and they've got some branding in it, and they're sort of rambly, and they have bringing people into the room. It's sort of normal TLC live streaming. But confidence is a big thing. You don't have confidence unless you, in fact, have confidence in your worldview. Because if you have confidence in your worldview, you can have at least a greater degree of confidence in your and stability in your political approach, because it's resting on a firm foundation, which then leads to, let's say, the dynamics of a lion culture instead of a fox culture where you're always reactive, because even if there isn't sort of a dominant culture, this is why we live in a very weird time, because you go to a conference like this and it's all, it's the woke people in power. But then if you, let's say you go to a left-wing conference, it'll be all of we're fighting against the patriarchy and hierarchy, and then both sides are like, wait, who really is in charge of this civilization? No, it's a bunch of foxes. And they're sort of competing in the ecosystem for their little den and for their pups. Lions are the king of the jungle. I was talking about Ayaan Hirsi Ali and talked about how she was a big deal. And then they kind of put her up as a figurehead of their movement because of her bravery. That was the New Atheists. And obviously in escaping the Islamic world, But then Ion, at the last ARC, the one before she announced that she's associated with Judeo-Christian values. And a lot of this, we're going to get into this Judeo-Christian and values because, again, well, one of the things that Jonathan says is that, well, in the last ARC, sort of Christianity was below the surface and it was more visible during this ARC. Yeah, sort of. But that leads into the question of what is this conference for? Because a lot of Christians were sort of excited because Christianity seemed more to the surface in this conference. A bunch of the political people noted it. Sargon of Akkad basically said, well, you know, Christians get to be there too. But again, Sargon approaches this as a political conference. And a lot of Christians will focus on the family is there. See this as sort of, well, is this us sort of taking over? Well, what does it mean to take over? And what are you trying to do? And again, back to this question of state religions and such. But then Jonathan says something in his video which was really interesting. And it's interesting because this is one of the reasons why I continue to be at ARC, Jonathan says, because you could say that this is, well, it's so hard to parse this because so you say that there's sort of kind of a standing on the edge of something like Christ and Antichrist, in the sense that Christianity without Christ, or secular Christianity, or cultural Christianity, I believe that is what Antichrist is. Well, that's interesting. And then when he said it, I thought, yeah, you've kind of been making those points. And he kind of has like Peter and Judas. You know, in the sense that Christianity without Christ, or secular Christianity, or cultural Christianity, I believe that is Antichrist. You know, if you think about the story of Judas, who wants to take Christian values and say that we need to give this money to the poor, and ultimately for forgetting the worship of Christ, by subjugating the worship of Christ, the Christian values, you can see that that's an image of Antichrist. And the other image of Antichrist, again, is St. Peter, who refuses the canonic aspect of Christ. There was a super interesting Substack entitled The Death Spiral of Progressive Christianity, Why the Mainline Church is in Crisis by Lauren Richmond Jr. A few months ago, I attended the gathering of mainline Protestant pastors. As is often true of such gatherings, there is a mix of theological and ideological perspectives in the room, though the dominant voices leaned heavily progressive. During introductions, one pastor from a particularly progressive denomination stood up, shared their story, and acknowledged that their congregation was coming to terms with its own demise. They explained that their church had concluded that the only faithful thing to do was to give away all of its resources to nonprofits and to close their doors for good. Hearing this, I was saddened but hardly surprised. It's a story that I've heard repeatedly in recent years as mainline churches continue to enter what may be described as a death spiral. Basically, mainline churches have come to the assumption that, well, what should we do? Nobody seems to want to come, and we have all of these buildings. Redeemed Zoomer should be very a little panicked by this because he's he wants to wait out until all these churches dies and then collect on all the buildings. I don't know if Redeemed Zoomer knows what these buildings cost to maintain. But we're going to sell these buildings. It's going to be really hard to know who's going to buy them. We're going to sell these buildings and we're going to give the money to the poor, which is basically when I posted this on Voices, I said, well, you're selling the precious ointment. It's basically Judas's move. And that's, so maybe I should maybe I should message Jonathan and say, let's talk about this Antichrist thing a little bit more. Because I think this is the question of the civilizational moment that we are dealing with. And Os Guinness at the conference again and again makes the point, and he made it at the last conference, that this is the civilizational moment. And so all of these deep questions about religion come to the fore. And that's why we're having all of this hand-wringing about dread Christian nationalism and post-liberalism and Catholic integralism and make Constantinople great again, and all of these issues, because this is the nexus. The only difficulty of, let's say, Jonathan using that language about Antichrist is that a lot of Americans who are brought up on apocalyptic pseudo-religious movies imagine Antichrist looks like the Balrog in Lord of the Rings, and that's what we're talking about. But of course, Jonathan is dealing with something far more nuanced. And then Jonathan goes on to say it's, well, okay, because if you say, okay, if it's Antichrist, well, should you be involved with Antichrist, Jonathan? I mean, come on. And this is where things get really tricky. And again, this is where Paul Kingsnorth, I'm trying to get a copy of Kingsnorth's speech, or my talk with him. It was not very long. I should probably have a longer conversation with Paul. Maybe I should have Paul and Jonathan on this together, because just using Antichrist in this context suddenly makes it very difficult because, well, Jonathan says, and is it our role to immediately denounce people like that for getting the order wrong? I mean, is Antichrist really just about order? Having the political, civilizational cart instead of the horse. And this is where, again, it was so interesting looking at the monuments in London. When you looked at the Victorian and when you looked at the Victorian monuments, they know symbolism. They expressed lion culture. And when we talk about lion culture, we'll have to talk about why lion culture in the West ended. Some of the aspects of lion culture which are present in the Bible, I think, but also why lion culture ended. And you can see, for example, if you look at, I talk about this in my sermon, my rough draft, which I'll record tomorrow for Saturday. If you look at Prince Albert's, the royal consort to Queen Victoria, when you look at his monument in Kensington Park, it is lion culture. When you look at Queen Victoria's monument right in front of Buckingham Palace, it is lion culture. And then you see monument to the Crimean War, monument to the Boer War. I mean, lions fight, they eat, they devour, they colonize. This is what they do. And this is why today, when I start talking like this, people are like, no way. That is not Jesus. That is. And so now suddenly you're into a very nuanced conversation about messiahship, which is a conversation that I've had with some of the Jewish elements of the corner for a very long time. Because I think that's actually one of the key areas in the gospel that deal with it. But it's not just, Jesus doesn't just basically say fox culture or lamb culture, because you've got the book of Revelation. And rumor has it that the next stop on the biblical seminar tour is the book of Revelation. And it's like, I don't know if Jordan has any idea what he's getting into with the book of Revelation. I, years ago, decided, because one of my members said I would just do my adult Sunday school class and I would say, okay, what book do you want to do next? And one person said, definitely not the book of Revelation. I said, then maybe that's exactly the book that we should do. I spent 72 weeks on the book of Revelation. 72 weeks. Why? How could you spend 72 weeks on the book of Revelation? Because the book is so freaking complex and structured. And basically what the book does is take Old Testament prophecy and apocalypse and put it through the filter of Jesus Christ into the eschaton. And this is where you get lion culture and Christianity in the book of Revelation. These themes are so nuanced and so complex that for Jonathan to talk about Antichrist here, and again, I'm not saying that's a misunderstanding or a word that doesn't necessarily work, but holy cow, in our context, and I believe I know what he means by it. It's an insane word to use, even though it is appropriate and it is correct, because in many ways, what we've seen, okay, so you take the Tom Holland thesis, and what you basically see is that, like in every war, the two sides continue to sort of react to each other. So how does evil respond to the redemptive work of Christ? Well, there's lots of different ways it does, but one of the ways it responds is by taking a facsimile and presenting an alternative. And this is, I mean, when Peugeot mentions Judas, and when this mainline pastor, no, go away, with this, it's an incredible piece, because he's basically saying the mainline church is killing itself because it has no reason for being. In that sense, it has become Antichrist. But again, using that word is so charged. And then when you look at a perspective like this Substack, The Human Carbohydrate, she is such a good writer. She is so freaking clever. She went to the ARC conference. I didn't see her there. How am I going to see her there? 4,000 people. I did. Stella, I can't even say her name. She's such a good writer. There she is. The way she opens this thing. I was with British right-wingers last night, and they all knew you. Ah, what did they say? The boys love you, the girls hate you. He looked like a young Alex Baldwin searching for his Hilaria. Arm candy to make people take him seriously. There must be in their 20s, but he said, I don't look 30, so I make the cut. He came up to me on my second day of the ARC Forum, the Jordan Peterson spearheaded conference that got the British media scandalized last week. He told me he's been trying to speak to me all day and invite me to the after party he was organizing. I was already signed up, but it's always good to be reminded I'm considered party fodder. And I mean, it's just, yeah, very different from Christian stuff in this little Substack. And so Peugeot's point, I think, is a critical one, that how does the main line slip into Antichrist and not know it? And again, the Antichrist comes in what we call the first epistle of John, which is itself a really complex book, because a lot of people wonder exactly what that book is. Some people suggest that perhaps the book was an addendum to the Gospel of John, because the Gospel of John could so easily be read in some portions through a Gnostic filter, that they had to write First John. Again, it's not exactly a letter. Second and Third John are much more letters, but First John to sort of counteract that Gnostic reading of the Gospel of John. Is that true? I don't know, but it's a theory as to, because the book we call First John is a super interesting book, but that's the context in which Antichrist comes up. So then you get to ARC, and many of the people involved, including the Human Carbohydrate, have zero interest in ARC being a Christian conference, even though Jonathan is like, no, the temperature of Christianity was definitely higher at this one. But is the main thing the rise of Antichrist? The rise of lion culture Antichrist? Leave a comment.
Well, I don't know about the meaning crisis, left, right, black, white, or other vices, which Jesus Christ is right, or if we're all saved. From my perspective, our propositions participate procedurally, running in circles. We're in body, we're in the age of decay. Symbolically speaking, the reapers are reaping, them damn egregores are whispering sweetly. We're all NPCs in the belly of the beast. Red pill, blue pill, bread pill, Mars Hill, or DMT, or whatever you feel. Got one and number two, it's all the same damn thing. So clean your room, repent on Zoom, ontology for dummies, a bird's eye view. 'Cause if you really knew, could you really even say? Totally depraved, all totally saved, a total disposition from the bed we all made. Or is it the elect, or are we just insane? From John Vervaeke to Jonathan Pajot and Jordan Peterson to the Chris Pacou Show, Paul Vanderclays and Griswold Grimm and all the dice he shakes. This estuary ditty is a little bit cringy, ain't quite the U-shaped or the hero's journey. All the NPCs in the flood treading water to watch you save the day with a bunch of chitter-chatter. From the ortho bros to the Catholic Joes, or atheistic Jobs, to Protestant folks, the Joe Schmoes, and Jewish Jacobs, and everything in between. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your